3, 2, 1. Welcome to Immersive Reactions. And today we're going to be going into A Song of Ice and Fire from Robb Stark's perspective. And if you're a Patreon watcher, you know that I've been reading the books, and I just finished some book chapters right before this. And one of the questions I asked was, why doesn't Robb really have any POV chapters? Even one. I think it would be interesting to dabble in putting one POV chapter of Robb's into the book, just to be like, you get to that chapter and Robb Stark's name on the chapter, and that's awesome to see. But I can understand why you don't put it in, because you don't want it from the point of view of the most important characters, to keep the mystery of those chapters from unreliable POV characters. So we're going to start this video now.
Important characters for the first couple of books of A Song of Ice and Fire, but
it's a little too fast. I'm going to go to 1.25.
Doesn't have any chapters from his point of view. He doesn't get a voice. Let's rectify that. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Geek. On this channel we cover the best in fantasy books and TV shows. A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, and more. If you like the sound of that, there's a subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen. Robb Stark doesn't have any chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire from his point of view. George R. R. Martin has said on several occasions that he wishes he had included some POV chapters, but instead we see his story through others' eyes, mostly Catelyn and Bran.
He actually does.
But they are hardly unbiased accounts. So what did the story look like from Robb's perspective? There are obviously spoilers here for the books and TV show. At the start of the story, Robb is just 14 years old. He is the oldest son of Ned and Catelyn Stark, and brought up to understand that he would be Lord of Winterfell one day. That is quite a lonely upbringing, knowing that no one can truly understand what you must become, but he finds peers and friends in Theon Greyjoy, a ward of his father and the only living son of Balon Greyjoy, and Jon Snow, a bastard son of his father, he thinks, so around his age but not a threat. And the three of them form a friendship group of sorts. As the story of A Song of Ice and Fire starts, Ned has taken Robb, Jon, Theon and Bran off to witness the execution of Garrett, a deserter from the Night's Watch. It's evidently not the first time that Robb has seen this kind of thing, judging by the way he talks to Bran about it, and it's a useful heads-up about how much Ned's morality and worldview has rubbed off on his children, and particularly Robb. This will be very important later on. It's on the way back from that Robb discovers the Dolph pups. Yes, Robb does. We often think about this encounter from Bran's perspective or Jon's, but in the books it's very much a Robb-led thing. He finds the dead direwolf mother, looks for and discovers the antler in her throat, picks up the pups, gets Bran to pet one, announces that they will keep them, persuades his father by offering to nurse them. It's a shame that we never get to see the development of the relationship between Robb and Grey Wind from his perspective, because their bond seems to develop at least as quick, if not quicker, than his siblings do. Pretty soon, though, the main plot kicks in, and King Robert Baratheon arrives at Winterfell with his family and retinue. Robb obviously plays the dutiful elder son, and as an aside, this may even be the first time he ever met the man he was presumably named after, Robert Baratheon. Anyway, the bigger personal issue that arises here is that Robb meets Joffrey, and they don't get on. It spills over in the practice yard where the Stark and Lannister children are being trained. Joffrey tries to challenge Robb to a duel with steel, but the Winterfell Master-at-Arms wisely intervenes, and Joffrey takes this as an opportunity to mock Robb. Not that these tensions get to play out any further in Will. Ned heads south to become Hand of the King, leaving Robb in charge of Winterfell. Responsibility at a young age, although Ned ensured he had plenty of advisors there. Catelyn, his mother, Maester Luwin, Sir Rodwan, although Cat's input was much diminished after Cat gets increasingly focused on Bran in his coma, and then, after the assassination attempt, she decides to head to King's Landing to tell Ned what she's learned. But Robb steps up. He deals wisely with Tyrion when he passes through Winterfell, letting him carry on his way unmolested. Compare this to how his mother reacts to Tyrion not much later in the story. Robb could have pushed the whole continent into war much earlier, but decides not to. He visits distant holdfasts to show his face, and with Theon, rescues Bran from the wildlings and makes the decision to spare Osha's life. Again, a big decision that will help the Starks hugely in the future. When the devastating message comes that Ned has been imprisoned and called a traitor in King's Landing, Robb again steps up, calling the banners, and one by one the Northern Lords and armies arrive at Winterfell, bringing new challenges with them. Mage Mormont says that he is too young to rule. Roose Bolton and Robert Glover both want command of the army. Lord Cerwyn wants Robb to marry his daughter. Great John Umber challenges his authority to his face. Each challenge is dealt with efficiently and fairly by Robb. In doing so, he repeatedly name-checks his father. My father would never do such and such, or my father always said such and such. It's clear that Robb is taking Ned as his role model to an extreme, and eventually the Northern Lords and the people start to respect and honour him as they did his father. When they march south, he is in undisputed charge. Which, from a casual read, sounds like Robb was a bit of a natural at leadership. Perhaps he was, but he didn't feel it. One of the low-key saddest parts of these chapters is how Robb would visit Bran sometimes late at night. Again, we never get Robb's POV, just Bran's, and we read this. Bran heard his brother sob. The room was so dark he could not see the tears on Robb's face, so he reached out and found his hand. Their fingers twined together. On the outside, Robb was doing everything he had to do, standing strong, resisting challenges, being the model of a young lord, determined to stand up for his family. But inside, he was a 15-year-old boy who had just lost his father. His mother had ridden off south months ago. His friend and supposed half-brother Jon had gone to the wall. Both sisters were gone. It's a story of someone thrust into responsibility too young while still dealing with heartbreak. It's tragic, and we only get to see it in pictures.
Yeah.
Anyway, he heads south at the head of his army. This was against Maester Luwin's advice, who wanted Robb to stay in Winterfell and give command of the army to one of the experienced lords, but Robb insisted. His father would not have done that, so he wouldn't either. Using this, Robb's insistence on doing as his father would have done seems to be his coping mechanism. He can keep going as long as he keeps doing what his father would have wanted. The army stops to regroup. At this point, Cat rejoins Robb, and we see things from her perspective. She still sees Robb as her young son, but has to accept his new authority. He can be her son in private, and he does turn to her, but in public he cannot be seen to be taking the lead from his mother. And at Moat Cailin, he faces a strategic decision. There are 2 Lannister armies facing him in the Riverlands, one on each side of the wide Green Fork River. Should he hold his currently very defensible position, commit all his forces to take on one of the armies, or split his forces? He decides, as was his position throughout the war, to go on the offensive. The bulk of his Sloving infantry will keep heading down the King's Road under Roose Bolton's control to meet Tywin's massed force. Hopefully the Lannisters will think that is all of the Northern Army. Meanwhile, a smaller but more mobile force will cross the river at the Twins and ride to the aid of the besieged River Run, his army by surprise. This is a great move. Making Roose Bolton head of the main force may have had longer-term consequences, but he probably was the only Northerner able to go toe-to-toe with Tywin's force and emerge with most of his army intact. And taking Brynden Tully the Blackfish with him to River Run was a masterstroke. Without his expertise and knowledge of the area, the ruse would have been rumbled much earlier. But of course, in order to get over the Green Fork, they would need to negotiate with Wolverine, who owned the only crossing that far north. Robb decides to send his mother to negotiate on his behalf, trusting to her greater experience and understanding of how the phrase operated. It's hard to say whether Cat could have got a better deal. She certainly thinks she got the best deal she could, and Walder Frey was certainly a tough negotiator, but still, time was against them, and what emerged was a very high price to pay. Regardless, from Robb's perspective, she presents him with a take-it-or-leave-it deal from Walder Frey, the central part of which is that he must marry a Frey. Robb will have grown up knowing that who he marries will probably not be his decision. His parents had never met before they were wed, for example, so although this will have been an unwelcome development, it will have been understandable to him. Like his father, he decides to just suck it up and hope that the marriage turns to love in the long run. Which leaves Robb free to head to River Run and try to catch Jaime by surprise, which he does. The actual Battle of the Whispering Wood is a huge personal success for Robb. He and Grey Wind, now huge and battle-ready, charge into their opponents. The damage they do gets recorded by bards and starts creating a legend, the Young Wolf. He can become his direwolf. With his direwolf by his side, he is unbeatable, and so on. Robb follows his victory at the Battle of the Whispering Wood with another at the Battle of the Camp, scattering the remaining Lannisters besieging River Run and forcing Tywin to retreat back to Harrenhal. All in all, a very impressive start to the war by Robb, and he sets himself up in River Run. It's there that the news comes that Ned has been killed on Joffrey's orders. This obviously ends any hope that the war might be stopped anytime soon, and brings us right back to that initial clash between Robb and Joffrey. This is now personal. And this is when Robb is made king. It's a small but important point that he doesn't seek it or seemingly want it. And we obviously never get to hear exactly what he thinks about it, but suddenly he is not just acting Lord of Winterfell, but king in the north in his own right, and king of the Trident. And he has to act like it. Robb takes a moment, or several weeks in truth, to work through what to do next. To be fair to him, it is a complex situation, but eventually he decides to send out a series of emissaries. Theon will go to his dad Balon Greyjoy to try to get the Iron Islands on side. Catelyn will go to Storm's End to try to strike a deal with Renly Baratheon, and Cleos Frey will go to King's Landing to see if the Lannisters are willing to parley. It's fair to say that none of these emissaries met with any kind of success. Indeed, Theon's arrival at Pike just provoked an Ironborn attack on the north. Cat arrived just in time to see Renly murdered by a shadow assassin, and Cleos Frey was virtually laughed out of King's Landing. Not much diplomatic luck for Robb there. And while the emissary...
So, it's simply just a recap. There's no, real speculation here. And I think he said earlier, too, that he wanted to avoid I mean, that's kind of, I think that's like kind of the point of these videos, is to elaborate on your own admissions. But if he just wants to reiterate portions that he thinks that would be interesting as a POV side of the book, I can understand it. To see more of the thought process of sending those people away, in which I do have those. I just read Catelyn's chapter where he sends the Lannister to King's Landing, and he's sending Theon Greyjoy to Balon Greyjoy and the Iron Islands. I and my kind of like way I was like processing that is that whatever Catelyn was telling him, he could not follow because his bannermen saw him as someone who was just listening to his mother. And so any good advice she gave him, he had to discount. So it's almost like if she gave the information to Edmure Tully or Brendan to give to him, would have been better than her saying it directly herself. And it's obviously information he needs to know. There's a second Lannister force amassing in Lannisport. I think you would enjoy What's the Three-Eyed Raven's Secret Plan by Altshift. I could try to look into that today. We will definitely see. I can shuffle some other videos and put that in. But yeah, I think overall, and thank you for the message. I appreciate it. I think overall, this type of lore video of just restating, like you have a premise at the start. What would it be like for POV chapters within Robb Stark? Which you do wonder, like, what his motivations are, but you infer that his mother cannot be the one telling him what to do around all the northern bannermen, and her presence is best somewhere else. Now, would it have been better for her to go to Renly, or would it have been better for her to go back to Winterfell? Probably neither, seeing how when Theon goes to the Iron Islands, Theon goes and takes Winterfell, which he would have taken Catelyn Stark, and who knows what he would have done to Catelyn Stark as well. I'll wait to see the premise at the end of this, but
were gone, he lost a crucial part of his support network as well.
Hopefully
He's left with the strategic decision of what to do with his forces. Tywin is encamped in hand, perfectly placed to block any attack on King's Landing from either of Robb's forces. Can Robb draw him out? The only way that seems possible to him is to launch an attack on the Lannister Westerlands. Might that force Tywin to abandon his position? If Tywin does head west, then Roose Bolton's forces further up the King's Road could move south. So Robb strikes west. His direwolf Grey Wind finds a goat track that can get his force past formidable Golden Tooth, and he takes out Lannister supporter after Lannister supporter. The Battle of Oxcross destroyed a new Lannister army being trained just 3 days from Lannisport. Ashmark and the Crag follow, and Stark forces head out to lay waste to Lannister holdings. But, and this is in many ways the turning point of the war, Tywin Lannister does not budge, instead focusing on securing an alliance with the Tyrells to save King's Landing from an attack by Stannis. Meanwhile, Robb was wounded in the battle for the Crag, the home of House West. There are lots of opinions here about Robb Stark winning many battles but losing the war, and that is undeniably true. But from his perspective, he was actually making strategically sound decisions. He wasn't to know about the shadow baby that killed Renly and freed the Tyrells to switch sides, or Tyrion making King's Landing extremely defendable, or even Theon turning on him and attacking the north. He can't really be blamed for any of that, but it happened, and he found himself alone, free from the influence of his father, mother, Maester Luwin, or anyone in his family or close friends, and injured. And that's when Jane Westerling comes into the story. On the show, she was called Talisa and came across very well, from an Essozi background, healing people and genuinely falling in love with Robb. But in the books, she is Jane Westerling, daughter of a lord captured by Robb earlier in the war, and a mother who is probably in league with the Lannisters. There is a theory here that Jane's mother set up all that followed, which is quite convincing on some levels. At the very least, it is a complicated situation. Robb captures the Crag, Jane's home, but is injured. She nurses him back to health, while he learns about how one of his best friends, Theon, has murdered his two brothers, Bran and Rickon, and Winterfell has fallen, and somewhere along the line, the two of them sleep together, taking her maidenhead, which was a big thing in those days. So Robb, feeling honour-bound, marries her on the spot. History turns on moments like this moment, and this moment is about Robb's honour. I'm sure that Robb thought about what his father would do even then. But the Freys just thought about the broken promise for Robb to marry one of their own.
Exactly.
They withdrew their support. Putting his strategic head back on, Robb here has no option but to abandon his position in the west and head back to relative safety in River. Of course, all this happens off camera. As readers, the first we hear of it is with Arya at Harrenhal, where the Freys are all screaming about betrayal, and Roose Bolton rather symbolically sets out to hunt wolves. Hasn't got the foggiest idea of what it all means, but in retrospect, we do. The first we hear about Robb is when he returns to Riverrun, a chapter we get from Catelyn's perspective. In the meantime, a lot of things happen. Edmure Tully, keen for some glory, defeats the Lannisters as they try to cross the Red Fork, preventing them from heading west and confronting Robb. So instead, the Lannisters head southeast, getting back just in time to save King's Landing from Stannis' attack. This was a win for Ed, but strategically inept. The whole point of Robb attacking the Westerlands was to draw the Lannisters back out west, and now Edmure had prevented that. Catelyn, broken by news of Bran and Rickon's deaths, they obviously aren't really dead, they are, releases Jaime in an effort to get her daughters back. The Northern Lords didn't take well to this, Rickard Karstark in particular. He sends soldiers after Brienne and even executes some Lannister prisoners in retribution. Robb has no option but to execute Rickard Karstark, which makes an enemy of the Karstarks as well as the Freys. Then Dunn has ordered the attack on Duskendale, his soldiers committing what we might today consider war crimes, and told to do so in his name. The attack on Duskendale is often overlooked in studies on the War of the Five Kings, but it's very important. It pushed Robb to a slightly insular position. Just weeks earlier, he had been heralded as the king in the north by everyone. Now, all those who heralded him seemed against him. The Freys thought him an oathbreaker. Roose Bolton and the main bulk of his army had committed an atrocity in his name. The Karstarks hated him, and even his own mother had gone against him. Robb's reaction was to retreat into himself. The only people who seemed to understand him now were his new wife and in-laws. As always, though, his instinct was to go on the attack. He persuaded Edmure Tully to marry Roslyn Frey in an effort to get the Freys back on side. It's a fair move. One of Walder's daughters would still marry one of the Lords Paramount. Little does he know that Walder Frey and Roose Bolton are by this time dealing with Tywin Lannister to betray him. Robb's plan is to head back north to the Twins to marry off, then further north to get rid of the Ironborn who are holding so much of his lands. Basically, he has accepted that his campaign in the south has come to an end. He has overextended and needs to head back to secure his heartlands. If he succeeds, then he basically cedes the south to the Lannisters, but perhaps ensures that the north and Riverlands remain his. We all know what awaits Robb at the Twins, but before that, he makes a decision that will probably be very important in the last two books. He decides that he needs to name an heir. He believes that his natural-born brothers Bran and Rickon are both dead. Is missing, and Sansa is now married into the hated Lannisters, so he, almost certainly, we never once see this in the books, but all the indications are there, that he names Jon as his heir as Lord of Winterfell and King of the North, even though Jon is technically a bastard, and Catelyn, his mother, is against it. Expect this to be Aegon's Winter. He also sends Mage Mormont and Gelbert Glover into the neck to get Howland Reed on side. Again, expect this to be important in the Winds of Winter. Robb himself leaves his new wife at Riverrun and heads north with his army to the Twins. We see what happens from Catelyn's perspective. Edmure Tully and Roslyn Frey are married, but then we have the Red Wedding feast. Robb and his mother Catelyn are killed. The Starks are deposed, and the Boltons take over as Wardens of the North. I'm sure that the Starks will get their revenge in the end, but for Robb, his time is done. Grey Wind is killed too, and Robb's body is paraded around with his wolf's head. How do we assess Robb's role in the Song of Ice and Fire? I think we should treat him sympathetically, accepting that George R.R. Martin never gave us his point of view. He probably was more connected to his direwolf than many of his siblings. He definitely tried his best to do as his father would have done on the world stage. On his own terms, he acted with honour. Yes, he won many battles, but lost the war. But him losing the war was more to do with Tywin's strategic mastery, Edmure's lack of understanding, and his own need to cling to his father's honour as a coping technique for his own loss, as it was anything else. Should we damn him personally?
Completely different, I think.
Robb did not want to go to war, and when he had the chance, he tried to secure a peace. But pushed into a corner, he always won whatever battle was put before him. Robb Stark may not have been one of the most obvious heroes of A Song of Ice and Fire, perhaps because we never got to see the world from his point of view, but ultimately he was a good man, overtaken by events. Bloody events. I hope that Ross history judges him kindly.
Art credits. Yeah. I would assume... Yeah, I feel the premise of this video was... It wasn't about the perspective of the books. It was just about perspective, like, total. Which we do get Robb Stark's perspective in the show, so it, like, I guess evens out a bit, but it's not wholly the same. But it is interesting, and I do have that question, like, what would actually have happened if Robb Stark was more representative or representative, whatever, in the books. But I'm actually going to take your suggestion. Thank you, Jeremiah, Shaquille Relay, and Mark for being our top members of the month. Thanks for watching. Check out our breakdown video for more insights. And do not forget to like and subscribe for more reactions. For full uncut content, join us on Patreon. We hope to see you in the next one.